everyone, so for something a little bit different today, we're not going to be doing any kind of like planned sort of video, but we are going to be taking a look at a book called Gay Girl, Good God by Jackie Hill Perry. This was a book that I actually found because it was recommended by Girl Defined, and it's a story of a woman who used to be a lesbian, and now she's not, because she found God. I know. Basically, the way we're going to do this video is, I haven't finished reading the book yet. I've read the first part, which is titled Who I Was. Parts 2 and 3 are called Who I Became and Same-Sex Attraction and ... So there's 3 parts to the book, and basically I'm going to be making a video after I've read every part, and we're just going to be kind of like talking through it. It's going to be very much in the same vein of my An Atheist Reads Ken Ham's The Lie Evolution books. Rather than like a review of the whole book, we're going to be going through it bit by bit, and I'm going to be sharing my thoughts as I read it, and hopefully you guys can share some of your thoughts too if you've read it, or based on what I'm reading out from it and stuff like that. Some people don't like these style of videos. I tried to do it with Jordan Peterson's book, and people didn't like it because they were like, you need to read the whole book before you judge any of it. And I'm like, that might be true of fiction, but I think when it comes to non-fiction, it's okay to take parts at a time and mull through it that way. I feel like when it comes to non-fiction, you shouldn't have to read chapter 10 to understand chapter 1. I mean, maybe you need to read chapter 1 to understand 10, but not the other way around. I think what's in these early chapters should be able to stand for itself. And so we're going to be going through bits of this today and reading bits of it and just kind of like having some thoughts about it. She opens her introduction by reading, I wrote this book out of love. Before writing it, I lived out the words. A gay girl once? Yes. Now, I am what God's goodness will do to a soul once grace gets to it. Now, you know I'm an atheist and I don't believe there's a God. I don't believe there's any, like, God who can affect your soul. I don't even believe in a soul as such. But I've got to say, like, I'm kind of like one of those live and let live atheists. I'm like, if you want to believe in a God, if you want to believe you've got a soul, as long as you're not harming anyone with it, you go ahead and do that. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me. So I kind of have to ask, if you believe in a God and you think that's going to have some, like, positive impact on your soul, why can't you be gay and a good person at the same time? Why can't you be gay and a believer in God? Why do they have to be mutually exclusive? That bit seems really silly to me. Then she tries to have this little kind of like get out of jail free clause where she says, in saying that, I know I've already offended someone. You can't just say that and then go on to be offensive as though it's gonna like get you off. It's like me saying, look, I don't mean to be offensive, but... and then saying something really rude. Like if I went, well, I don't mean to be offensive, but this is a really unflattering author photo on here, but I didn't mean to be offensive, so you can't be offended by it. It feels like it's in the same vein as that, and that just seems really silly to me. And also, you know, just because you might be offending people, it doesn't also mean what you're saying is right. It's like a kind of fine line, because on the one hand, there are some things out there that are fact, and that your feelings don't matter when it comes to facts and science. Your feelings and whether you're offended by it or not don't change the fact that, you know, like, such and such an element has this structure, whatever. Your feelings don't affect the fact that water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. So, you know, there are certain things where it doesn't matter if you offend someone, it's true. This isn't one of those things. This is just offensive. And by saying, well, I know I've already offended someone, but it doesn't get you off. She says, there are many who, while reading, won't understand gayness as something possible of being in the past tense. So you mean rational, logical people who understand that your sexuality isn't something that you can change. It's not something that you choose or decide on. It's just a part of who you are. You can't stop being gay any more than a person can stop being tall or short or black or white or whatever. It's just a part of you. It's essentially built into your DNA. It's just who you are. Like, okay, you can change whether you, I guess, express it or act on it, you know, like, but it doesn't change who you are. I can break up with Dan and I'll still be heterosexual because being attracted to men is just part of who I am. She can go ahead and marry a man and have babies with him, but it doesn't change the fact that she's still attracted to women. Maybe it means she's bisexual, maybe it means she's homosexual, and I don't know. But the point is, you can't just ignore the fact that you're attracted to women. I'm not saying you have to date them, I'm not saying you have to do anything with them, I'm just saying you can't change that. She says that some people claim that, you know, your sexuality is either who you are or what you have never been. To this I disagree. The only constant in this world is God. Gayness, on the other hand, can be an immovable identity only when the heart is unwilling to bow. What's really interesting is you'll hear she repeats this a lot, like, gayness. Like, that is a thing, as though a person has levels of being gay. What's interesting is that in contrast to this, so instead of using something like straightness for heterosexual people, as though there are like levels of that, she instead uses phrases like hetero love, which I find quite interesting. The kind of old English lit student in me back when I was like 16 and doing it at A-level would kind of pick up on these subtleties, and you know, it's kind of it kind of gives these sort of little subtle little hints about what the author thinks of gay people and straight people. She never uses phrases like homo love, only hetero love. And she never uses phrases like straightness, only gayness. So it kind of shows that on a very subtle level, whether she intends it or not, she doesn't necessarily see being gay as something that you equate with love, but she does straightness, and it's an interesting little, hint at homophobia, I guess. A little bit of logic here is that she says, I've not always loved how Christians have loved the gay community. Between the banner-painted hate and the interpersonal silence, my love for the church moved me to attempt to write something of balance, something that can make the love for which they are called to walk in the tangible proof of what God is like. Tiny bit of logic in that saying, she doesn't like that the church has been so, anti-gay people. Kind of like, how Westboro Baptist Church is, and they're just so douchey about it all. She doesn't like that kind of attitude and, behaviour, which I think is a great thing to call out because it's horrible. What I dislike is this next bit where she says, my love for the LGBT community makes me desperate for them to know God. My love for the church makes me desperate for them to show the world God as he is, not as we would prefer him to be. This book is my efforts towards such an end. So basically this, combined with everything else that she writes, I don't want to read out the whole thing. Basically she's doing this whole hate the sin, love the sinner thing, and I've spoken about this in other videos and how I think it's just a cop-out and it's stupid. If you want to hear me talk more about that kind of thing, I'll put a link in the description below to the video where I do talk about that. Oh, another positive note actually here in this introduction is she writes this line, which I actually really respect. She says, in writing this book, I did it as myself, meaning I am as honest as I know how to be. I have never been one for pretense. I can respect that. I think that's a really kind of great sort of rule and standard to live by, and I like that about her. That doesn't mean I respect the views that she has, and that doesn't mean I agree with her views, and that doesn't mean I'm not going to critique what she's being honest about, but at least I respect that she is being honest. Another thing, I'm trying to get these positive things out there as well, because, while a lot of this book is horrific, there are some good things to it. One thing I will say, in reading the first, 100 pages of this book or something like that, it's only a short book, it's 200 pages, so in reading the first half of this book, she's a pretty good author, she's a pretty good writer. And that is very rare in Christian books, I've found. This might just be because I've read a lot of stuff by the likes of Ken Ham, Michael and Debbie Pearl. I recently, where is it? Yeah, I've also got this book called Disciplines of a Godly Woman that I'm hoping to make a video about. And I've got to say, this one isn't as bad as some of them, but some of the stuff by Ken Ham and the Pearls, it's written so poorly, it's so difficult to read, it's so repetitive, it's these people have never heard of an editor, it's horrible. So at least this book is comprehensible, and I like that about it. Again, might not like the content, but at least it's readable. That was the introduction. This first part of the book is called Who I Was, and it's telling her story basically from when she was born. So she talks a lot about her life basically from being born up until she found God. So this is her story of what it was like to live as a lesbian. I actually think she raises some really interesting points in this. She talks about what a difficult life she's had, and, I do feel sorry that she's had to go through that. I also think it highlights a lot of insecurities and flaws that she has. I say flaws not in a bad way, just in a human way. And I think it explains a lot about why she feels the way she does about certain things and maybe why she turned to religion and stuff. I think she also raises some really interesting points about kind of internalized homophobia and just how society treats gay people and coming out in general. And I think she raises some really interesting points. and then just misses the point, if that makes any sense. So she talks about some things that should be really interesting and that we could have some really good in-depth discussions about. She shares some of her experiences, but just misses the point of them, which is a real shame. We get one of those points in this very first chapter, where she talks about being asked out on a date by a girl she went to school with. She writes, "Jackie, you want to be my girlfriend?" she asked me, squinting like she knew her question might be offensive. I'd seen her before. Back in middle school, she was one of the few who didn't hide her lesbianism in the hallways, classrooms, or wherever else conversations were held. She wore her identity with a smile that sat on top of her skin that looked like bronze and had sat in the sun too long. I noticed it and the body she constantly called attention to. Interesting little opening paragraph. I think there's quite a lot to unpack here. For one thing, I've got to say, this other girl, she sounds like she is secure, she is confident, she knows who she is, she likes who she is, she's owning it. I have a lot of respect for this girl. Then Jackie writes that she constantly called attention to her body. I can't help but feel like this is what a lot of Christian men do, this is what a lot of Muslim men do, this is what a lot of religious men do. They blame women because they notice their bodies, if that makes sense. Just because you noticed her body, it doesn't mean she was trying to get you to notice it. Does that make sense? Just because she was there and she was comfortable and confident and happy in herself, it doesn't mean she was begging for attention. The fact that you noticed it is on you, not on her. She didn't set out to seduce you, she didn't set out to make you sin. It was just a really subtle little thing, this little line that made me feel like she was kind of blaming her a little bit. It was, I don't know, it just didn't quite sit right with me. And then she talks about how she didn't know how to respond because while she was attracted to this girl and she liked this girl, she didn't know how the other kids would respond. So she was like, all I could think about was Monday and what it would have in store for me if I said yes to her invitation. The news wouldn't walk but run towards every ear and fly out of every mouth that heard it, until the school no longer saw me as the girl that had a smart mouth and a timid frame, but as the gay girl. They'd say my name like it was contagious, like what I was would rub off on their skin, crawl inside their little heterosexual hearts, and meddle with it until they ended up just as sick as I was. I kind of have to ask, is this really what you think the other kids would think? Or is this what you were thinking? Because you have this internalized homophobia that we see has been ingrained in her from a young age by her family and the people she went to church with and the people around her. She definitely grew up around a lot of homophobic people, and I can't help but feeling like these are more her thoughts than what other people would have thought about her, how other people would have treated her. That said, it's still a chance that people would have treated her like this, other kids would have. Kids can be really cruel. Again, I think that's a big reason why we need to stand up to homophobia. We can't normalize it. We can't make this kind of behaviour normal. Kids shouldn't feel the need to come out as gay. It should just be a thing that's accepted. Obviously, in schools and stuff, all kids are going to gossip about who's dating who. Is he dating her? Is she dating him? Is he dating him? Whatever. But I don't think the genders of the people involved should ever matter. And I think the sooner we get to that point, the better. So again, I feel like this could raise some really interesting conversations about how we talk to young people and teach them about sexualities and gender and whatever, but she just misses that point. Continuing on that point though, she raises a really interesting point where she says, I thought about the violent ones the most. It was a gift of theirs to use words as weapons and never discard them even if it killed everyone they spoke to. Gay slurs were their favourite. So again, it just shows what crap young gay people have to put up with on a daily basis, and I don't think that's fair, and I think that's something we need to fight against. However, she didn't fight against it. She, I wouldn't say encouraged it, but she definitely enabled it, because her response to this girl asking her out was, "Girl, don't play with me like that, I ain't gay." I sounded straight on purpose. I was not willing to undress my secrets in front of her, or anybody else for that matter. For now, I was okay with the fantasy of being honest. So basically, she's talking about how she wasn't ready to come out, she didn't feel comfortable with it, which, is fair, she should be able to do that stuff in her own time, but she didn't need to be rude and disrespectful and kind of homophobic to do it, I don't think. And that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, the title of chapter 2, which is a time frame, immediately discredits most of what she has to say about anything in my mind. Because she starts talking about how God created the earth and God created Adam and Eve, and she sets the time frame as 6,000 BC. She's a young earth creationist. And I can't take anyone seriously who believes the Earth was created 8,000 years ago. Yeah, she opens this chapter though with, I was attracted to women before I knew how to spell my name. I think this is really interesting, and it should tell you something. It should tell you that things like sexuality are these natural things within us. It's not something we learn, it's not something we're taught, it's not something that we're scared into being or doing or whatever. It's just something very natural. She says that even from a young age, she didn't understand why that one girl who sat 2 desks over made me feel weird, or why my heart moved whenever she did. But then what I find very interesting, and I think this is, as we'll see later, the result of the people she's been around. I think this bit here is the product of socialization rather than just nature. But she says that her and this other girl who she was really attracted to would like hide away in like a little playhouse and kind of like, I don't really know what she's getting at. I don't really know what she's trying to say. Maybe they kissed or something. Maybe they were just intimate or whatever. But she says, without being taught to, we hid ourselves. Sometimes our minds carried rules that our hearts knew we were breaking. So she's trying to claim that it was this natural thing for her to feel she had to hide her sexuality. And what she's implying in these paragraphs in this section is that she thinks that God made her feel bad about her sexuality from a young age because it's a terrible sin and she had to hide it away. What I think actually happened was that she was going to Sunday school where she was constantly told what an abomination homosexuality was. This isn't an assumption. She literally writes about this stuff later in the book. And you know, she grew up with a homophobic mother. She grew up around homophobic people. She grew up around friends who wouldn't be okay with her being gay. She went to a church that wasn't okay with gay people. She says these things, like feeling the need to hide her sexuality, hide her attraction to girls. She says it was natural. It was something that God put in her head, but it wasn't. She was picking up on subtle social cues from the people around her that she cared about and respected. And that's all there is to it, and I think it's sad. She even says parents can't help but pass things down to their children, like homophobia. Moving on a little bit, she talks a lot about like the Genesis story and God making Adam and Eve, and again she just takes it all very literally and thinks this all happened 8,000 years ago and so on. It's an odd one. So she says she didn't find God until she was about 19, but she'd always gone to Sunday school. She grew up with a Christian mother. She grew up with religious friends and religious family and so on. She definitely wasn't an atheist before she turned 19. And she says things like, to me, the devil made more sense than God sometimes. Satan, on the other hand, only told me to do what felt good or what made sense to me. If lying allowed me to keep the belt in my mum's hand from tearing my behind in two, then lying was a good thing. I defined goodness on my own terms. There's so much here. She says what she felt was unbelief of God, and like here later she says, unbelief doesn't see God as the ultimate good, so it can't see sin as the ultimate evil. Instead it sees sin as a good thing, and thus God's commands as a stumbling block to joy. It's not that she didn't believe in God, it's that she believed there was a God, and she believed there was a devil, and she somehow knew rationally and logically that a lot of God's rules were stupid, so she didn't want to follow them. She wanted to follow her heart. But then because of everything she was being taught, she was made to feel guilty about them. She was told that she was just following the devil, that the devil was, influencing her and whispering in her ear and blah, blah, blah. It's the same weird rule that people like Girl Defined follow, where they say like, I can't trust myself. I shouldn't trust myself. I shouldn't listen to myself, my own conscience, my own feelings. No, I should only listen to God. Only God knows what's best. Because if I listen to myself, that's listening to the devil. I just think it's all a really damaging way of thinking and way of living. And it does mean people end up living life in fear and living life doubting themselves. And I think that's just a horrible and really sad way to live and to grow up. And I think it's something we should not encourage in children. In the same chapter, she writes, being born human meant I had the capacity for affection and logic. Being born sinful meant both were inherently broken. Desires exist because God gave them to us, but homosexual desires exist because sin does. I don't even know how to put into words how messed up this way of thinking is. What's interesting though is this little section where she writes, same-sex desires are actual. Though born of sin, they aren't an imaginary feeling one conjures up for the sake of being different. But the actuality of the affection doesn't make them morally justifiable. Again, okay, a lot to unpack. On the one hand, it's great that she knows that people aren't just choosing to be gay. It's great that she knows that these aren't just whims and fancies and people are like, oh, I'm gonna be gay today, you know? I can't decide to be gay any more than a gay person can decide to be straight and so on. It's good that she recognizes these things, but this idea of like saying they're not morally justifiable, I just find so odd, because to me, like, what your sexuality isn't an issue of morals. It's just a thing you are. There's no morality to it. Morals come into, you know, making sure you have consensual relationships and, you know, making sure you're like faithful to someone if that's what you've agreed on, and so on and so on. That's where the morals come into it. The gender of your partner and the gender you're attracted to. Just morals aren't involved there. It's not a moral issue. It's bizarre to me. Chapter 3 is mostly about her mother, and she talks about how her mum kind of became pregnant with her later in life. Her dad wasn't really around much. Her dad didn't really want much to do with her, and her mum considered having an abortion. Her mother and father weren't married when her mum fell pregnant. She writes this at the end of the chapter. Though accomplished in sinful lusts, he had given me to her. He was forming me in her womb. So she writes about how, even though her mother sinned, you know, sex outside marriage, her mother gave into these lustful desires and whatever, even though her mum sinned and did something bad, something great came out of it, and that great thing was a baby. And God made something bad, a baby, apparently come out of this really terrible sin. I don't get why sins like lust and premarital sex are to some people different from homosexuality. If her mother was okay to give into premarital sex and then get forgiven and, you know, have a baby and God made something good come out of it and whatever, why wouldn't God make something good come out of a sin like homosexuality? I mean, I don't think either are sins, but yeah, I don't know, my thoughts I find it hard to express my thoughts on this one, but do you know what I mean? I don't know, let me know what you think of this one in the comments. It's an odd one. The next chapter, she talks about her relationship with her dad, and it's a kind of messy one. He wasn't around much, and basically he came to her at one point when she was, I don't know, like 6, 7, 8, 9, something like that, and basically said, hey, look, if you don't feel that close to me, you don't want to keep in touch all that much, that's okay, it's your choice. And she says, I couldn't understand how this man, my father, could tell me, his daughter, that any attempt at distancing myself from him would mean nothing. It proved that this man could not possibly love me, or if he did, it was sometimes love that my heart didn't have the capacity to hold. I learned how much of a risk trust is because of my father. At the same time as I was teaching myself how to avoid pain, I was also training myself to live without love. Oof, okay, so, daddy issues, trust issues, love issues, men issues, all leads towards a very vulnerable, insecure teenager. Combine this with someone who's coming to terms with what their sexuality is, they know that their mother hates their sexuality as well, they feel abandoned by their father, they're being told by all these people around them that this central part of their identity and who they are, they're being told it's a horrific abomination. Yeah, it's gonna lead to a very vulnerable, insecure, messed up teenager. And to make it worse, she was sexually abused as a child as well. The teenage relative whose home I was in wanted to play in the basement. I don't know how it all began, I only recall such a deep and undisturbed recognition that what he was doing to me didn't allow me to breathe normally. He told me to do it and I obeyed. Did it last 50 seconds or 15 minutes? I don't know. He was bigger, older, and for all I knew, this too was a game. I was a victim of sexual abuse. Having the ability to name what happened to me released tears in both of my eyes. Not remembering the trauma doesn't mean we're left without its effect. So she kind of blocked it out for a few years and then it all kind of came back to her at once. Now this next bit is really kind of important. Between fatherlessness and sexual abuse, my entire frame of reference for people God made male was built on the experience of their doing. One man's absence taught me men were incapable of loving. Only in short, sporadic flashes of affection would they be able to do what they said they'd do. I refused to believe men could stand for truth ever. The other man was not a real one at all, but while becoming a man, he decided to act out his urges on a child. The consequence being that a man's touch sounded like everything unsafe. Sexual abuse for me turned male intimacy into an undignified practice of the male ego, to which I would only be a body to conquer and not a person to love. Oof. Again, I have so much sympathy that she had to go through this. No child should have to go through it. No person should have to go through this. She actually, what I think is important is that she notes here, it's important to note that sexual abuse is not what made me gay, nor did fatherlessness. They only exaggerated and helped direct the path for what was already there, which is sin. So on the one hand, I'm like, good that she acknowledges that they didn't make her gay. It's really hard to put into words what I'm trying to say here, and I don't want to be misconstrued. Part of me hates that she's using this as an excuse because I think it almost legitimizes the awful, terrible, harmful arguments that people make where they say all gay people were abused as children and so on. It almost or at least it almost attempts to legitimize their arguments, or people will use this as an example to legitimize their arguments. And I don't like that because their arguments are flawed and wrong and harmful. On the other hand, like I say, none of this was her fault. The fact that she was abused wasn't her fault. The fact that her father was absent wasn't her fault. She's amazing that she got through it and survived, but I do think it offers an explanation as to why she felt so insecure and vulnerable going into her teenage years. Where I think me and her differ, she sees all those things as making her vulnerable so that she would give in to her urges and sin by, like, living her life as a gay woman. She sees these things as leading up to that. What I see is these things leading up to her being an insecure, vulnerable woman, combined with the homophobia of her family, which we'll get to in a minute, made her so insecure, and that's why she turned to God and felt such internal guilt about living a happy, free life as a gay woman. Does this make sense? So what I'm saying is, like, she's using this as an explanation for what she thinks was wrong in her life, and I'm saying, no, this has nothing to do with you being gay and your sexuality, and or even the fact that you wanted to, be who you are and embrace that part of you. She's saying finding God and the church saved her and made it all better. I'm saying, I actually think this stuff left you vulnerable to being manipulated by a lot of religious people in your life. I don't know, that's just the way I see it. Again, let me know your thoughts. I really hope I've expressed myself right here and that this has come across the way I wanted it to. In the next chapter, she talks about kind of coming to terms with her sexuality, but also the kind of horrific stuff she had to hear as a kid from people at church and other religious people in her life. She says that as a kid and a teenager, she felt the constant craving to do what Leviticus called abominable. I'd heard more than one pastor say it, some even scream it, like the voice of someone trying not to swallow fire, but knowing that didn't keep me from wanting her. So she was living a life of fear, fearing this thing within her. She was being told that she was an abomination and that, she was going to go to hell. This next bit is a terrifying thing for a child to feel. I didn't want to go to hell. When I thought about her, this girl she likes, I thought about it, meaning hell. I imagined what it would be like to live there, seeing the flames make use of my skin by turning it toward me, unclothed and fully insecure. Everything good would be gone and remembered as something taken for granted. I'd walk forever fatigued towards the end of the darkness, praying for light, for hope, for a break, a breath, a hug, a smile turned towards me, a laugh, a prayer heard with the potential of being answered. God would hear but not speak, see but not rescue. Hell would be a choice, and I had to decide if she was worth it. No kid should have to feel this kind of pressure and make these kind of choices. Having a crush on someone, being attracted to someone, being in a relationship with someone, it should be this amazing, uplifting thing where you feel amazing about yourself, you help someone else feel amazing about themselves, you build each other up, you feel happy, you feel good, you feel fulfilled. That should be what relationships are about. You shouldn't be told you have to choose between happiness and going to hell. Happiness and burning in hell. She talks a lot about, like, having a lot of insecurities, about her head and her heart telling her different things. She implies that one of it is essentially like the devil whispering in her ear, and the other one is God trying to get her to do the right thing. That's what she implies. Again, you can just see she's so full of insecurity. She's living a life of just fear and doubting herself and feeling terrible about something that she has no need to feel terrible about, Is actually really distressing to read. This stuff made me feel so sad for her. She talks about how, like, even before she acted on anything with a girl, she felt terrible because she was like, God, look, he could see what my mouth never said and hear what my heart whispered under its breath. My secret was no secret at all. My sins were all ever before him. God was listening and ready to whisper back in a different voice. And then she talks about how she didn't feel, like, ready to give in to God yet because she wanted to date this girl, which is a perfectly natural thing. Imaginary friend or giving into your basic human instincts. It's very easy to see what is probably the more powerful emotion there, and I don't blame her. She said, I didn't want him to hear and forgive. I would only listen to the voices that led me away from the light. I wanted the freedom that was hidden in the dark. Being honest with myself, I knew I wanted to be gay with her. Kind of weird way of putting it, but okay. So she messages this girl that she likes. She says, when she responded, I read it and felt weightless, as if the roof above me cracked open and I flew, hitting my ankle against the freshly split edge of on the way out. This was more for me than her. This was my way of exploring the world and my place in it. She was only the fuel. I kind of love this. I think this is really sweet. This is like, you know, someone's first crush, someone's first love, kind of knowing what it's like to have someone like you and you like them back. And it's amazing and exciting. And it's just sad that she now takes such a wonderful, obviously happy, obviously freeing and, you know, confidence building experience. And she's like, whoa, the devil made me do it. It's kind of sad. What's interesting is when she talks about being with her girlfriend, she says, our closeness was unlike how preachers had described it. They said it was unnatural, but for me, their silly little psalm didn't change how good it felt to be near her. What they called strange felt more natural to me than heterosexuality ever had. Her entire body made me feel at home in myself. I held her tighter, not wanting it all to fade into a dream again. Why would you ever want to lose this? This is amazing. How can anyone ever see this as a bad thing? Again, though, her kind of insecurities come into play, and she talks about how girlfriends that she dated essentially tried to change her and change the way she looked and the way she dressed. But then she also talks about how when she started dressing in more like masculine clothes and stuff, she also felt more comfortable and confident and things like that. So very interesting little thing here. Kind of like you can see a lot going on with her and her kind of insecurities, but also her finding her confidences, and it's very interesting. She misses all those points, and she just thinks it's all about how she was living a life of sin because she wasn't dressing the way God created her, or created her to be. She wasn't being traditionally feminine. She says, nature as it was shown in my body called me woman, but society called me manly. Neither versions were a sufficient mirror. I'd need someone smarter and not created to tell me who I was, for he would be the one who would know best, meaning God. So again, it's typical of what you see with a lot of religious people. You have a young woman who's insecure about herself. She's been told different things. She's feeling lots of pressure from her family, her friends, from society as a whole. She's unsure who she is. She's still discovering her identity. She's very vulnerable. I think a lot of young women go through it, men as well. Young people go through this. It's a very natural thing. I did. There was a long time before I felt very comfortable in my body, confident in who I was, confident in how I looked. For a long time I wasn't. And, you know, so it's very, very relatable. It's just sad that the church essentially took those vulnerabilities and insecurities and said, we're the only ones who can make them better. She felt the need to pass off the responsibility of creating her own identity and deciding on her own identity. She decided to pass off that responsibility to God and the church just took that and grabbed it and I find it quite sad. So this stuff just to me says it sounds really harmful, and it also sounds like it's coming from a woman who is insecure and damaged and hurting, and I don't know if damaged is the right word, probably not. That sounds a bit harsh. That's not what I mean. But it's definitely a woman who, I don't think she should be spreading this message, basically. And I don't want young people to hear this and take it seriously. That really worries me. But she says, all things were created through him and for him, meaning God. My hands, head, face, legs, hips, hormones, private parts, voice, feet, fingers, feelings were all made by him for him. Apparently, this body was never mine to begin with. It was given to me from somebody for somebody. I can't get behind that. Your body is yours. It's not for anyone else but yourself. You do with your body what makes you happy and confident and comfortable. You're the one in charge. It's no one else's but yours. I can't reiterate that enough. I can't say that enough. Next up, she talks about coming out to her mother and how she's like, I always wondered if she knew I was gay. And then talking about how, you know, she didn't really explicitly come out to her. Her mum just kind of awkwardly asked her one day based on something they were listening to on the radio. Her mother is very clearly homophobic and didn't want her daughter to be gay. You can tell that her mother's been kind of pushing this agenda on her throughout her childhood. And I think her mother is part of the reason she felt shame about her sexuality. She says things like, I didn't want to see the disappointment or hear it made into words. When she did finally come out, both to her family and like to all her friends and kind of society in general, she says, being out felt better than I thought it would. You know, see people walking down the street when she was with a girlfriend, she says that people watch to take part in the love, not to condemn it. Again, I think that's amazing. Why would you ever want to lose that? That's perfect. That's what people should do. That's how life should be, regardless of your sexuality. But again, you can still see that she's living a life where she's ashamed of who she is. And logically, rationally, there's no reason for this shame, but it's clearly been so ingrained in her from a young age by her mother and by the church and so on. She says their glee, meaning the other people who've like seen her and support her relationship, their glee contradicted my conscience to the point of confusion. Confusion as to how God could dislike what made a good number of both straight and gay folk smile. As much as I wanted to believe God grinned when he thought of my life, I knew he didn't. Horrible. God was haunting me. She phones up one of her friends and she's like, I'm feeling conflicted, what do I do? And her friend is a Christian. She's called Keisha, I think. I hope that's how you pronounce it. Keisha knew him already, meaning God. So my hope was that she could help me understand why. He knew I was gay and she did too. So why was he talking to me so much? She was like hearing God judge her in her head, basically. Her friend is such a bitch. She says, I've been praying for you. When you told me you were gay, I blamed myself. Said, God, could I have been more in her life? I thought it had to be something I did wrong, but God told me just to pray. And then she thinks because her friend was praying for her, that's why God wouldn't leave her alone. Obviously, whatever was being asked of him regarding me was making my little sinful world spin. Sadly, her father dies, her relationship with her mother gets worse. She says home got harder, less time could be spent there, more money was tossed into weed-scented pockets, so she started smoking a lot of drugs. She has money trouble, her car's towed, and then her friend is still like, you know, God's talking to you, he's punishing you for being gay, blah blah blah, I'm praying for you, you're wrong, all this sort of stuff. And then when she's at her lowest point, her most vulnerable point, her most insecure point, all this terrible stuff's happened. She's feeling pressure from everyone around her, everyone she cares about, everyone she loves. They're all telling her that being gay is wrong. And so she says, is God trying to get my attention by making my life harder or something? I mean, does God want me that much? As Grace would have it, he did. And then the next chapter, set in 2008, talks about how, she starts thinking that God is essentially talking to her, leaving her messages. She thinks that God is trying to warn her of death, a death supposedly soon to come because of who I loved. I loved a woman to death, apparently. This is a very insecure, vulnerable woman. And she's not insecure and vulnerable because of her sexuality. She's insecure and vulnerable because of everything else in her life. Oh, I don't get why she can't see this. She says to choose God would mean I had to leave her girlfriend. This didn't sound like a fair transaction. In my mind, choosing God was the same as choosing heterosexuality. I know now what I didn't know then. God was not calling me to be straight, he was calling me to himself. The choice to lay aside sin and take hold of holiness was not synonymous with heterosexuality. In my becoming holy as he, I would not be miraculously made into a woman that didn't like women. I'd be made into a woman that loved God more than anything. So she's saying, you know, she understands that God can't stop her being attracted to women, but she can stop acting on it because that's what God wants, apparently. Some of these things, like, she writes them and you can tell it's from this place of, like, absolute self-loathing, and it's heartbreaking to read, you know? I'd been sinning my entire life, but I was not alive, I was only breathing. I knew he required me to let go of my girlfriend specifically, but more than her came to mind. What else was I loving that might be the death of me? More sins came to mind. How easy it is to recall your sins when you realised you've already been sentenced. Pride, lust, pornography, lying, dishonouring authority, and lesbianism. She speaks about her girlfriend and says, I loved her, but according to God, our love was no different than death. Apparently sins, like being gay, would instead do to me what all sin does. Separate me from God, and thus true love forever. It would be the death of me. Allowing my sexuality to rule me was a death sentence, but so was everything else. A thorough survey of my own heart, led entirely by the Holy Spirit, allowed me to see what I'd never seen. Not only that I needed freedom from homosexuality, but from all sin, I was holistically in need of God. And that is essentially the first part of this book, the first half of this book. It's... God, I don't even know what to say to this at this point. I do just find this whole thing incredibly emotional and heartbreaking and really, really sad. This is a young woman who's been through a lot, who's been through trauma, and instead of having her family and friends around to support her and build her up, they've made her feel like so much of it was her fault for sinning, for being a bad person. They've made her feel terrible about herself. Religious people in the church have preyed on her vulnerabilities and played on them and made them worse, I think, and I find it very sad. On the one hand, it seems that she's in a happy place now, and part of me is like, well, if it took religion to get there, you know, is that okay? Is that a good thing? But another part of me just finds it sad that she's living her life lying to herself. I really wonder if she feels the same way about her current husband as she does about the girls that she spoke about, this wonderful feeling of freedom and just love and confidence. Like, I wonder if she feels the same way about that. I don't know, I guess we'll get to that in the later chapters. There's a chance, you know, maybe she is bisexual so she can be happy and fulfilled with, you know, a man or a woman. I don't know, like I say, there's still half of this book to read. This is just the first part. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, on her background, on her story. Do you think someone can be, like, used to be gay? Oh god, I don't know. Just on a final note, if you guys like any of my science or animal-based videos or stuff like that, I've got a really cool new t-shirt out in my merch store featuring this adorable little octopus that I drew and designed myself. I absolutely love him. It's just a limited run that's only available through February, so if you want to get it, I would grab it quick. It's a design that I really worked hard on, that I absolutely love. And I based it all on like sketches that I'd done myself and then made it in Photoshop and everything. So it's all done by me. I think these ones are a little bit more expensive than some of the ones in my merch store because I've like upped the quality of the materials and stuff used, and I've tried to make them a really cool, really like kind of premium shirt. There's men's shirts, there's women's shirts, there's some posters and stickers as well if you want something a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger to display, you don't want to wear it. And there's also some kids t-shirts as well and some cute little baby grows for any of my tiny little mini fans out there. So, because I know a lot of you have kids as well, who say that, you know, you like watching my videos with them, so I thought I'd make something for them as well. But, you know, no pressure to get this stuff if you don't want it or you can't afford it. Like, no pressure at all. I really appreciate everyone who just watches my videos and who likes my videos and subscribes to me and supports me that way. I appreciate you all so much. Yeah, these t-shirts are available if you want one, if you fancy kind of like being a part of that little like merch thing, I don't know. And if you do get one of the t-shirts, when it arrives, send me a picture of you wearing it because I'd love to see it and I can like share it on my Twitter and stuff. And yeah, it would be amazing. It would make me so happy. I've got my own little copy version of it coming in the post at the minute, so hopefully I'll be wearing it in a future video, so you can see properly what it looks like on before you buy it. But like I say, it's not going to be available for a huge amount of time, but this year I'm planning on doing several kind of short runs of t-shirts. So the next one I'm working on is going to be one with Kyra, a little design with her, and it's going to be one where all the profits from that t-shirt go to Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, where we adopted Kyra from. So it's going to be a charity one, that one. This one is just for a little bit of fun because I like octopuses, so, you know, why not? So if you want to wait until next month and get the charity t-shirt, you can do. Otherwise, this one's available now and it's really, really cool. And like I say, I'm going to be doing these cool limited runs throughout this year at different times, and just, yeah, working on some really cool special stuff, and I'm really happy and excited about it. I'm sorry for rambling so much. I love octopuses. I can't wait to get this t-shirt myself. I'm stopping talking now. Thank you for watching today. I appreciate you guys so much. You're all amazing. Yeah, drop me a comment, drop me some messages, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you guys again soon. Thank you so much for watching today. I really appreciate you guys so much. And a huge thank you goes out to everyone supporting me on Patreon this month, including Gambit and his chauffeur, Deshauwn, Data Jack, Rachel B. Royer, Heidi Mattila, Jadeon Sheppard, Corthee, Jaylee Moore, Sir Michael Moore, Christian Opitz, Sage Villarreal, Greg Ladd, and Loren Hart. And to everyone else supporting me on Patreon, you guys are amazing. I love you so much. Don't forget, if you want to see more stuff from me, go follow me over on Instagram at Rachel Oates with a 0, not an O, because I'm annoying. I've also got a merch store if you want to check that out. I'm going to be doing some really cool stuff with it this year, but you know, no pressure, whatever. I'll see you guys again soon.